It is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage writer, director, and star Chiwetel Ejiofor. I wanted to start by asking you about what aspect of William's story you first became familiar with, because there's the book that he wrote, there's a TED Talk that he did, there's a documentary. So when did you first become aware of him? Yeah, you just can't hear it here.
Oh, I can't. Okay.
Yeah.
I became aware of William Kamkwamba just from reading the book. You know, from when the book came out, I was a friend of mine was called me because he happened to be at the book launch party, and just thought that it was this fascinating story, and called me to talk to me about it and to see if I'd like to have a look. And of course, I wanted to. So that's when I read it, and I just fell in love with his story. Yeah. It was extraordinary.
What were you hoping that a narrative feature could add to the story and to audiences experiencing it that they might not have gotten from the book?
I think there were a few things that I felt in the book. You know, first of all, it's that sense of trying to just reach a wider audience with a film, and then there was something about, you know, in the first adaptation of the book, just trying to work on just the structural relationships, you know, just the ideas of these dynamics and how they could be formalized into a coherent narrative of a screenplay, so that you could look at these family dynamics, but then you could also look at the kind of wider dynamics of the place of Malawi. You could look at the structures of religion or patriarchy or economics, and you could start to sort of organize all of those principles into a story that held at its center this father and son and this family going through this extraordinary crisis. You know, it just felt that it seemed to talk about a lot of the kind of themes, you know, personal themes, and then these geopolitical themes that were so relevant and so important. They were important then. They were, some of them even more so now, you know, 10 years later. And so it felt that could all be structured into quite an interesting narrative, into a screenplay. So that's what I was excited by in the book. I mean, everything was there in the book, but of course, in the form of the book, it was very sort of different. But there was something about sort of stripping that down to tell a story in a structured way like this.
Yeah, and you fit so many of those aspects into it, but I love the way that at the end of the day, it is a story that's rooted in family and the emotion of that. Was that always something that you had a vision for?
Absolutely, yeah. I felt that was the key to people really being able to kind of go, what had happened to me when I was reading the book is that kind of sense of slipping down the rabbit hole, and this idea of that kind of Alice in Wonderland, sort of understanding this place in a very different way, because, you know, we've often seen a lot of images of places and people in this kind of struggle, but we always see it from the outside sort of looking in on a news report on something. And this idea of, you know, just taking an audience into the experience. You know, what is it like inside that experience, inside an impending famine, inside what are the family dynamics, what is happening in that community when these things start to sort of surround them. That's what I felt in the book, and that's what was so exciting to me about that shift of point of view.
Yeah. When was the first time that you met William in person, and what were some of those conversations that you had?
So I went, after I'd sort of written the first draft of it, I then I started the sort of development process proper, because Andrea Calderwood and Gail Egan came on board from Potboiler Productions in the UK. This is before the BBC got involved, and so I then went to Malawi to meet William. My whole reference for that first draft had been the book, and so I wanted to kind of get my own experiences and my own taste of the place. I'd never been to Malawi before, so I went to meet him, and he was incredibly generous with me, and just took me around his whole community, took me around all of Wimbe, the surrounding region of Kasungu, his parents, his sisters, the whole kind of, and then all of the locations of all of the events, you know. And it was on that first trip that I realized that that this was where we were going to shoot the film, ultimately, that we were going to shoot it right there, right where all of these events took place. And, and it was really him introducing to me to it in that way, and then me taking a trip around Malawi on that first time that was sort of critical.
Because I know you filmed it at his cousin's house. It's right next to his parents'
Yeah,
house,
I couldn't shoot in his house because I wanted to shoot in his house, but he'd done so much innovation on his house, by the time we were going there. There were so many different things, solar paneling, cable TV, and there was no way we could shoot there. So we shot in his next door neighbor's house, but some of his windmill structures were still up, so we could only shoot certain directions. And when we were at his cousin's place next door. But it meant that Trywell and Agnes, they were all there. We'd see them at lunchtime. But that also put that sort of nice sense of really the authenticity, but also that sense of responsibility. Everybody was right there.
Yeah. I have to ask, is the windmill that we see at the end of the film the one that he built?
It is not. No, we reconstructed the windmill, which took quite some doing, actually. And it was a very sobering moment for us all and for the production team, because we had all these meetings about the windmill, about how to build it and how we're going to get it, how we're going to raise it and all of this stuff. And you realize suddenly that it was like 20 people, engineers, people had, done this stuff for years, designers and everybody. And, and you really had that moment of just understanding that he was 13 with no experience, and he did it himself, back then. And we, I think I may have actually even said that at one point, guys, come on.
A 13-year-old can do this.
It's like we can't fail here,
Did you ever consider having him build one for you?
That would have been, if you could pop back and build a windmill for us, that would be great. Yeah.
And you hired a lot of crew from Malawi, which is interesting because it's great to include the community, and I know that was important to you from the offset of making the film, but it's also an area that doesn't have the infrastructure of a film industry. So what were some of the challenges that came with doing that for you?
Well, we had, the challenges that we had were sort of, I guess, the kind of logistical challenges mainly, that because Malawi doesn't have a film industry really, and there hadn't been a film of anywhere near this size made in Malawi. It just meant that we needed to kind of start bringing in equipment from, Joburg, obviously, and South Africa, and down from Kenya. So that just took the kind of, crossing borders with equipment, timings, all of that stuff, all the kind of logistical things, and some of that was kind of complicated. But, I had the benefit of Dick Pope as a cinematographer is so amazing and so capable of absorbing some of those sort of stresses as well. And improvising, we were building scaffolds because we didn't have a crane and stuff like this, and he really sort of took that on board in that way. But the flip side of all of that was that being there gave us this extraordinary sense of just empowerment in our storytelling, and that, like I was saying, that sense of responsibility, but also that. There were so many people around who were familiar with the story, who knew William Kamkwamba, some people who had even gone through these experiences in 2001, 2002, so were very intimately aware of the famine and what had happened and what William had done. And so they were just so supportive of this process and of the film. And just, it was priceless, that sense of having that community behind you. Because it was really, we just sort of descended on this place in a way, and it's kind of like the circus coming to town. And I feel that if they had resisted, if the people there in Kasunguru and Wimbe had kind of resisted that, it would have been really, it would have been impossible to make the film. But when they were behind us and the sense of them supporting us, just gave us an extraordinary, energy and wind, So it was great to be there. It turned out to be, a really good decision in the end.
Yeah. Did you plan from the offset when you first started writing the script to have it be a mix of Chichewa and English?
I didn't know when I was starting the process. I think that I still sort of on the bubble about it because I felt that I was. In my head, I was thinking, well, is that really going to work? Are we going to be able to, even raise the finance for the film, and are we going to be able to do all these other things? And then it was really just a process, an incremental process of understanding the need to have an authentic representation of this place and this space, and to allow people into the private dynamics. That was the bit that I felt that hadn't really been explored in a way, of being allowed into the village and being able to sit in and amongst people and hearing them talk and really feeling those dynamics play out, and those interpersonal dynamics and those family dynamics. And so once a decision had been made, to go and shoot the film in Malawi, and in the exact places where the events occurred, then it seemed like a completely natural thing to then, to start talking about the language and start talking about Chichewa and that balance of English and Chichewa, which is how people speak in Malawi. They speak a lot of English in schools and in places of work, or obviously amongst people from different places. English is the kind of common language in Malawi. But then at home, and in the village, it's Chichewa. So it felt that was a very important part of that authentic rendering.
And was part of the journey to making it feel authentic for you, knowing that you wanted to cast someone local for the role of William as well? Or did you go through casting in the UK or elsewhere first?
Well, I knew that it was going to be that, the film rests on William's shoulders. And so I always knew that it was going to be kind of complicated to find the person who was going to play William Kamkwamba. And I didn't put any parameters on that. Yeah. My feeling was, if I spoke to Alexa Fogel, who cast the film, and we spoke here in New York, and a while before going out there, and what our conversation was really like, we'll just spread the net as wide as we can, and we'll just see everybody we can, And so and she had contacts in Kenya, South Africa. She created contacts in Malawi, so we were going into schools, we were just meeting people were going on tape, we were auditioning, everybody, just trying to find people who were interested in drama, people who weren't particularly interested in drama, we were just trying to find somebody who could communicate some of this stuff, and out of that process, came Maxwell Simba, who is Kenyan, and so I was just very excited by that. When I first saw his tape, I was in London and I saw it on the computer, and I couldn't understand how he was doing what he was doing, because it took me a while, of acting, to feel confident enough to do so little, to be quite minimal, to allow things to have their kind of emotional weight without pushing it, without kind of trying to demonstrate something. His first tape was just sort of very quiet and engaged, but it had this sort of emotional depth and center, and I couldn't work it out. I actually just really was confused by it, and so I spoke to Alexa, and she was like, "No, that's how he interprets it. That's how he's sort of has this great emotional intelligence, He's very smart as well, but he has this great emotional depth." And so I went to Malawi. I went to Nairobi to meet him and to workshop with him, to improvise with him, to just see if there were any parameters to what he was doing. And there weren't. Everything I did, he was able to counter, and he's a remarkably talented young man. And so it felt very clear at that point that we'd found William Kamkwamba. And then the only bit that remained was, again, just the language part of it. And and he was very excited to learn Chichewa and to get involved. And English isn't even really, English is certainly not his first language. Swahili is his first language, and so he's acting in both English and Chichewa, both languages that aren't his first language. It's really, really remarkable performance. It really is.
No, he's absolutely incredible in it, and I'm so excited to see him do more after this film. What were some of the scenes that you workshopped with him, or was it more kind of general exercises just to get him comfortable with the overall process?
It was, I think it was, what did I do with it? I think it was, I think we probably read the big scene in the field, and we did some of that, and then I think I did, I did just some improvisation, just father and son improvisation, sort of status relationships, and different ways of Trywell trying to kind of dominate conversation or dominate in status and position, and how he would try to dodge that, and what he would do to get around that if his father was behaving in this way, and things like that. He really sort of understood and related to the dynamics in a really interesting way, but without ever feeling sort of he was never sort of overwhelmed by that kind of dynamic or threatened by that kind of dynamic. He never made simple choices. His choices were always very complicated and always came from a place of quiet confidence. Which I thought was not only really interesting, but I thought it was the sort of thing that would really infuriate the kind of, in my characterization of Trywell, that really infuriate that sort of part of Trywell that wants to disturb his son's confidence somehow.
And I know that when you started writing the script that you didn't always plan to be in the film yourself as well. What was the point at which you realized that you were going to play the role?
Well, actually, what happened was I got old enough to play the role, during the
during the 10 years.
Yeah, during the process, when I started, I was sort of early 30s, but I'd flattered myself that my playing age was 25, and but then in the process of doing it, I did, and actually also at that point, I did psychologically feel that I wasn't quite in the space in my life to play Trywell, really. To sort of deeply feel that kind of generational shift. But, in that process of developing the film, it just got sort of closer and closer into a point where I was like, no, I am old enough to play this part, and then it just became a decision of whether I was going to, knowing that would take on a whole other section of kind of obviously of responsibility in terms of making the film. But it didn't feel at that point like I could really ask somebody else who was of a similar age to me, who was also an actor, to play Trywell, when they knew that I had written Trywell, that they knew that it was involved in my own sensibilities, and that then I am then directing them in a part that I've sort of written in a way for myself. I just thought that was a weird position to put another actor in, and so I decided that I couldn't do that.
Did it add a nice natural dynamic with the rest of the cast, though, because you're directing, so you're already there in a paternalistic manner for them in that sense? So did it help with creating that immediate chemistry of the family and of the relationships with the rest of them?
I mean, especially with Maxwell, especially with that trying to create and hold that sort of dynamic between the two of us, and I couldn't imagine by the time we was in the process of shooting, and it was something that I didn't realize beforehand, but I couldn't imagine somebody else being in that dynamic, as a director or any, that I just felt it was there was a kind of a real purity to that relationship, because I could be his director and work with him in that capacity and play Trywell as his father, and it felt very, very good, very natural to do that, yeah.
I'm also curious in terms of the casting process, what you wanted to bring to the casting room, because obviously being an actor, you've gone through the harrowing experience that is auditioning. And was there anything that you felt like you wanted to make sure was like the tone or the setting of it that you wanted to do a little bit differently to the experiences that you'd had?
I think I just wanted to make sure that anybody who walked into the room felt that they had the opportunity to really explore, and to be as bold as they wanted to be, and to have a real kind of a feeling of sort of safety in the room, that everything was positive, essentially, that choices were encouraged, and that I was also going to be engaged in trying to bring out of people who I felt, or I kind of had an instinct, were, not sort of, were maybe a little insecure, because obviously when we were casting in Nairobi, and when we were casting, these aren't, and casting in Malawi, these aren't huge film industries, obviously, and people aren't that used to auditioning, and they might have been really kind of trying and gearing themselves up to it, and then in the room, intimidated by the process all of a sudden, and just trying to find a way past that, to allow, that whatever it was to kind of to sort of come out, and so I would do a lot of calling people back, just to and calling people back immediately, just saying, listen, it was great, I'd love to see you again, so we'll just, we'll do it, next Wednesday, we'll set it up and we'll do another, just so that people felt that sense of confidence and that sense of kind of leaving on a bit of a buzz and then coming in again, and really sort of, kind of going for something. And it was, so there was, and I think it's that thing as well of just really, really looking at performance, and for all of those parts is just, and I think as an actor, that's something that that I had an advantage on. I think just being able to see elements in somebody's performance that I thought, okay, well that actually is the thing. Maybe the rest of it isn't working so well, but that's the thing right there. And if that's pushed, then the rest of this will work quite well. So it's just keeping that very watchful eye on the process, I think, and a great casting director and Alexa Fogel, of course. But that was the process for me.
And then kind of going back a little bit to the fact that it was a mix of experienced and novice actors in the film. And you have such a great cinematographer in Dick Pope, who you mentioned before. He's done a lot of kind of documentary and music concerts. So he's very attuned to just following where the action is. Did you have more of a structure of this is your mark, you're going to move here? Or did you just kind of allow the actors to move around the space a little more freely?
No, I was very precise, actually, for most of it, because, I guess because Dick Pope and I, we did very extensive shot lists. And the reason that we did that was because I was aware that on the day, I didn't want to be thinking about the shot. I wanted to know where the camera was going to be next, what the next setup was. I didn't want to be thinking about it then because I wanted to be in the kind of the Trywell of the thing. So it was very rare, actually, in the end, that that things that we would sort of be on the fly. And but having said that, when I was blocking scenes out, when we were doing our shot lists, and I'd block out the scenes, wherever on the location, and as all the characters, I was I really justified, as an actor, I justified for every character what those movements would be about, why those movements would be happening in those ways. So there was a sense that if there was a conversation to be had in the blocking, that it had come from a place that I would be satisfied as an actor, with that blocking. So it would be a sort of additional thing for somebody to, but I wasn't resistant to it, but it was, it just didn't really come about like that. It felt pretty organic. And so when I was saying, this is how I see the scene, to say Isa or Lily or Maxwell, most often it sat well with them, It just also happened that we had, already blocked it that way. But yeah, it felt pretty organic to them.
And then in terms of directing yourself, is your method traditionally that you'll stay in character between scenes, and did you have to adjust that at all to be able to step in and out of shots when you were also performing in them?
Well, it depended. It varied depending on the scene. That sometimes I had to kind of sort of almost kind of completely come out just to look objectively at what was happening. And have conversations with Dick and have conversations with the other actors, and then try it again. And other times it just felt like I had to stay in character, and the only time I would break in a way would be to say cut, because I felt it was very important to maintain the cut, essentially, to be able to say cut, not action, which the first AD would take, but I would always, because there was, for various reasons, I just wanted to make sure that was part of the. So, but then, in terms of just kind of immediately going again, in terms of just sort of, playing out the scene in a completely different way, in terms of just that kind of organic process, it was, that was sort of fine,
And then I'm also very curious about, obviously, the ending of the film. You know what's going to happen. It's in the title. I found myself tearing up and going, you knew this was coming. But how did you kind of step back and approach how you wanted that to culminate in the film, given that audiences know what happens at the end of the film before they come into it?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think that the sort of overall feeling that I have about that is that it's you know, but that it's how it happens. You know, it's not what, it's who. You know, it's that you learn so much about the people and the world and their dynamics and what's at stake for them, that the building of the windmill in the end represents something completely different by the time, you know, from the time you walk into the film, hopefully, until the time you see it built. It sort of symbolizes a whole host of different things. And in a way, you know, I always thought of the title as a kind of red herring, you know, that the perception is that he harnesses the wind because he harnesses the wind for the electricity and therefore the water, but he doesn't. He harnesses the wind to fulfill his potential as a human being and ends up going off to Dartmouth to do that, you know, to sort of live his life outside of this village. And he harnesses the wind to kind of to move into a life that he can be the center of and determine. So to me, it sort of felt like that the wider story and the bigger story of that harnessing was actually sort of beyond the kind of the front sort of page, you know. So and the desire was to kind of reach beyond and reach into the kind of emotional depth of the specifics of this time and this place and this person and this community, so that by that point it doesn't matter if you kind of know that the windmill's going to turn. You know, it's really you're cheering for a whole host of different things.
No, definitely, absolutely achieves that. So we have a couple of questions from our audience, and I wanted to start with one from Barbara, who is saying, with such a busy acting schedule, are you actively looking for your next directorial assignment, and what would interest you as a next project?
I mean, the process of directing, you know, I was very fortunate in this experience because obviously it took a long time to make the film, but it was a project that as soon as I read the book, I just sort of fell so deeply in love with it, and just, you know, that kind of the nature of that passion is you know, really can carry you through all of the different occasions and different choices, you know, that you make, and that real sense of need. You know, I really felt that at that certain point, you know, I need to make this film, you know, and other things then fall away. And so I guess, you know, what I would look for is a similar feeling. It doesn't need to take quite so long, but it's that it's a similar sense of need, and that I think is just I think you just react to that sort of naturally. Other things just tend to fall away. You know, it's how I started as how I kind of became an actor. It wasn't really that I made a choice to be an actor. You know, I didn't say one day, you know, I'm going to be an actor. Really. What happened was I just carried on doing it, you know, and I made choices about what I was going to spend my day doing or where I was going to go based on that work and what I wanted to do with my life, you know, and I feel like that's always how I kind of approach things. If I feel passionate about it, it just ends up happening, you know, I end up doing it as opposed to considering it and then doing it, you know.
No, I love it. Our next question is from Smareda, which is basically asking, as a director, are you bringing lessons as an actor to the actors that you direct, and what were those lessons that you felt important to utilize?
Yeah, I think that, inevitably you do, and you kind of, you want to have, I think it's that thing that you just want people to have the freedom, you know. I think that's just the crucial thing. And I just, you know, and I think it's sort of something to do with just really allowing people to investigate themselves. You know, I feel like that sort of self-knowledge is so important, because that's what teaches me as a director, you know, as a person. I can write the part, and then, you know, with somebody like Lily, you know, I can give her the part, but it's really the way that she interpreted Annie that really kind of moved me when I was when we were starting to play the scenes. You know, that she took it in her own sort of way, and then that very sort of organic and very natural way that she kind of and it just really came alive in a way that I didn't, you know, I had my perception of these, you know, things, and it's just, I didn't want to impose my will on anybody. You know, I didn't want to think, okay, I've written this, I've walked the room playing these parts, I've thought about all of this, and then, you know. But right now, this is all about you, and about you, you know, filtering this through your own experience and your own lens, and then replaying it to me so I can see really what it is, and whether it works and where it doesn't work, and what fails and what succeeds, you know. And that's really the power, you know, of an actor. I've always loved it when directors have allowed that freedom, you know, that have allowed and can push, you know, and that's important to push. But it is to never impose, you know. That's crucial to me.
Are there any specific directors that you remember really just giving you that freedom with your performances?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, very early. The reason that I the reason that I really fell in love with film acting and thereby started a process of thinking about directing was when I worked with Stephen Frears, you know. Stephen Frears and Chris Menges, a cinematographer on Dirty Pretty Things. Because Stephen, I mean, it wasn't something that I tried to do on this, you know, you kind of have to wear your own clothes, you know, but he had Stephen has a way of sort of talking and opening up scenes that I think is very poetic. You know, it's very engaging and it's poetic, but it's very deep and it's very understood and it's very sort of felt. You know, for example, when we were doing Dirty Pretty Things, I had a scene with Audrey Tautou. She's going to sell a kidney. I don't know if any of you remember the film. Or she's going to sell a kidney, and I come into the room and I'm screaming at her. I understand she's going to try and sell a kidney for a passport, and it's this, you know, terrible sort of row that happens in this room. And I remember doing the scene, all of that tension, all of that anger, all of that frustration. And Frears said at the end of it, he said, you know, I thought that was very good, but I think we should do it again. And this time I want you to hold her, you know, not physically, you understand, but hold her. And everything else just keep the same. And of course, it sort of opened up the scene in a completely different way, in a completely different energy. I came in again with the same anger, but with a completely different emphasis on how I was talking to her, on the dynamic between us. And that's kind of what I mean. I think it's that sort of, I think it's, you know, there have been directors that I've worked with who have been able to kind of open up scenes to me and to speak in a language that I understand. Oftentimes that is a sort of poetic language. It can be, you know, do it louder, do it faster, do it softer, do it, you know, but it also can, you know, I've also really loved it when there's been something underneath it that has pushed it to that point of clarity. You know, when somebody speaks to you in the best way they possibly could, you know, and you feel it, you know. And so, you know, that's, I mean, like I say, you wear your own clothes, but that's what I was trying to bring to that dynamic, to allow people the freedom, but to try and really observe in a way, and to try and talk and understand that you can talk in ways that can open up scenes for people, that can open up ways of approaching acting, can open up ways of approaching life sometimes, you know, depending on how good the director is.
I mean, I think you've absolutely achieved it, and the performances in this film are a testament to your style as a director.
Thank you.
So I want to congratulate you. The film is streaming on Netflix and in select cinemas March 1st, so please be sure to check it out and tell all your friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you.